Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Out of My Aussie Leader Leaderboard podcast. My name is Ben, and before we begin today's podcast, I've just got to clarify, I am currently a Labour voter, so therefore I may, in your mind, have a bias towards Labour, but I try my best to have neutral, grounded opinions when it comes to ranking who is doing good and who is doing bad each week. Today is the 28th of the 9th, 2025. So this podcast is basically a replication of a bigger podcast by TLDR News where they focus on world leaders. And I was like, what about if we just focused on specifically Australian leaders and how well they've been doing? Last week, we had three winners and we had three losers, and this week we'll have three winners and three losers. I didn't get any suggestions from the audience last week, but if you would like to add a suggestion for who you think should be moved up or moved down, feel free to add that, and then feel free to leave that in the comments and a reason why you believe they are a winner or a loser, as that will make my job a lot easier. To start off, we'll focus on the title of this video of why Susan Ley may no longer be the leader of the Liberal Party for much longer. Andrew Hastie. Andrew Hastie is the current Shadow Minister for Home Affairs. He's a member of the Liberal Party, he is from the national right of the Liberal Party, and he is a member for Canning. Andrew Hastie, in the last 2-3 weeks, has been planning a coup, it seems, for the leadership of the Liberal Party. This week, he stated his intentions to leave the front bench if Susan Ley was unable to change the party's direction on net zero. This has been a contentious issue currently within the Liberal Party, as alongside the Nationals, the party has been battling to change the opinion on net zero and not reaching it by 2050 because they do not see it as realistic and they do not see it as viable. He was further supported by other Liberal Party members such as John O'Dunham and the recently ousted Jacinta Price, who we discussed last week. As mentioned in my last video, Susan's support was pretty razor thin, only winning 3 votes in order to become leader of the Liberal Party. Therefore, this means that even though Angus Taylor was unable to get support, it is more likely, especially now that we've been a little bit into Susan Ley's leadership of the Liberal Party, that Andrew Hastie may be able to get that support that Angus Taylor was unable to get, especially since the reason some people may not have voted for Angus Taylor was because he had failed as Shadow Treasurer in the last election. Hastie seems to be capitalizing on the fact that people want to support someone that isn't Susan Ley, and it seems like, at least at the moment, he's just building up his trust. This was featured in an ABC News article and video on YouTube, in which they say that it's not a question of if Andrew Hastie is going to oust Susan Ley, it's a question of whether it is going to happen before or after Christmas. I originally had stated, so when I first wrote out this video, I originally stated before or after this year, but before or after Christmas is even more wild because it is being stated that it's happening this year, at least from my interpretation of that. Whilst Andrew Hastie's statement has garnered him a lot of support within his own party room, he should note that 77% of Australians want the government to focus on extreme weather risks and preventing that through their climate change plan. And 61% of Australians believe the government should do more in regard to climate change, according to a YouGov poll from August this year. I'll also note a fascinating poll I found from the Australian Institute in 2019 that had 54% of coalition voters being in favour of net zero by 2050, which isn't fully relevant as opinions most certainly would have changed since we're now in 2025, but it is an interesting time capsule to examine that at least back then, a majority of coalition voters were like, yes, net zero. They may have changed their minds now, but it doesn't seem like that, especially after the last election where the Liberal Party lost when trying to talk about going nuclear instead of going like solar and wind farms and things like that. It is curious to see what Andrew Hastie, if he were to challenge for the leadership, what this would do for the party. But at least for the moment, he is definitely winning because he is gaining support and he is making it that he does seem like the face of the party, especially because Susan Ley is just not well liked. The most interesting thing I found about my last video and saying, is Susan Ley a winner, was a lot of people who, I don't want to make assumptions of people's political leanings, but it definitely came across like these people were at least Liberal supporters or right-leaning, which is fair enough. And I welcome discourse and things like that. But they definitely don't see Susan as an effective leader. And some actually view her as quite Labour-leaning, which I entirely disagree with. I think they're very opposite in quite obvious ways. But it is interesting to see. The next winner I have here is going to be an interesting one to discuss. And I want to preface this with the fact of going off of what I previously said about net zero and how people are thinking about net zero and thinking about climate change broadly within Australia, what is happening about that and why I think this is a win for this member and for the Labor Party specifically. So Chris Bowen. Chris Bowen is the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. He is a member of the Labor Party, a part of Labor Right, and the member for McMahon. I think this is probably a controversial pick, especially since we've got discussions going on about whether or not net zero is realistic, whether or not net zero is achievable by 2050, how much you have to do to make it realistic by 2050. This is kind of a rant, and also, I think something is happening, and at least there are achievable goals here, and we are seeing the work actually being done. So a lot of the time, people say, politicians just say things and they don't actually do stuff, which is very fair and very true. But I have to disagree with that in this instance. So as stated last week, where we had Murray Watt putting up those green go zones and no zones for renewable energy and making it realistic to put out renewable energy in certain states and cities and things like that, I think that shows that current government is focusing on reaching achievable energy goals in time. So they've put out a statement that they want to achieve 60 to 70% of energy reduction by 2035, which will help them get to net zero by 2050. I'm mostly counting this as a win because I view it as ambitious and I view it as achievable. I am seeing the work being done. I am seeing them put in the effort. And so I think that that is a win. Now, I will state that the media disagrees with me in a few interesting ways. So there are several different factions when it comes to media, and a lot of the time they lean towards taking the liberal point of view, even if they all fundamentally agree in very interesting ways. The publication Crikey argues that the goal that the government wants to do is not enough, that they aren't doing enough in order to reduce climate change, in order to change things, and it's not going to be enough. But my counter argument to that is, what is the alternative, especially with the Liberal Party currently fighting about climate change and reaching net zero? So you can't argue that one party wants to do it and that's not good enough, but another party doesn't want to do it, and you're not even going to mention that within your article, which in my opinion is something that should be mentioned at the very least, because to me that comes off as tacit support for the Liberal Party without even saying it, because you're just saying Labor bad, but you're not saying, well, I believe this, therefore I should not agree with this other party. I think that should correlate, in my opinion, personally. I can disagree with things the Labor Party does and then also say, but Liberal Party, blah, 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 blah. Or vice versa. I could say Liberal Party did something wrong, but Labor Party, blah, 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 blah. The Herald Sun, which was locked behind a paywall, seems to be arguing that whilst net zero is happening, the Liberals should focus on crime statistics instead. I find the title of this article very interesting. The word crims is both hilarious and very, very cringy. I'm just like, why are you calling them crims, man? It's not, you're not young, you're not hip, you're not cool. Don't, just call them criminals. And then the Courier Mail, which is a like Murdoch Press sort of Queensland-based news centre, which is also locked behind a paywall, seem to be arguing that climate change is actually not happening at all, or not happening at least to the extent that we are meant to believe, and that everything will be fine, we just have to ignore it, and we're wasting money, we're wasting time, we're fine, everything will be fine. The ABC, in my opinion, did have the best argument, saying that this is too little too late. And they gave reasoning, they gave statistics, they gave facts, and they said that you'd have to plant so many trees in order to make up for how much carbon was in the air currently. They said that could potentially be done, but they don't see it as achievable with the government's current goals and what the government wants to do. I will say that alongside some of Crikey's arguments, it's probably the most well-meaning review of the policy. Those two are arguing for why something isn't amazing without just going, nah, it's just bad because I don't like it. Or arguing, well, we're focusing on the wrong thing. I think that's stupid. You can't just go, we can't focus on this because this is a bigger issue. I think that's dumb. You should be able to focus on two issues at the same time. It has been said that we need to cut emissions to 75% by 2035 or plant more trees in order to take CO2 out of the atmosphere in order to get an achievable goal for net zero by 2050. Whilst other nations haven't been as on board, such as the US, it makes it seem like we need to put more effort in. I understand these arguments, and in a sense I do agree with them, but I believe we should be encouraging any change to climate change commitments, especially with the US backing out and the coalition seeming to flip-flop on whether or not they want to go out in the sun. I guess it's probably sad/biased on my end to say that this is a win, mostly due to the fact that I think saying climate change is real and something needs to be done is a good thing. I think it is hard to argue it's not. We can't look at all the floodings that have been happening and all the weird extreme weather patterns that are not normal and go, yeah, this is just how things are. I don't care what your political leaning is. I hope we can all at least acknowledge this. But if you disagree with me, I understand completely, and I would like to hear your reasons why. It would be hard to convince me otherwise, especially since it seems more and more likely that we are not going to be able to stop global warming before 2050. And so if we want things to get worse than they are currently, which they will do, weather will get more extreme and these things will keep happening if we do not make changes. And whilst I personally don't believe on individual level change, I do believe in systemic change, and I believe our government can do that systemic change. Liberal or Labour or Greens or whoever, you should vote for someone who is committed to changing and putting action on climate change. So that is my slightly unbiased pick for this week, but I do also believe that Chris Bowen is winning because it is A, realistic, B, achievable, and C, like, action is being happened. Like, action is happening, so there is movement forward, and therefore I can only see that currently as a win, despite the criticisms. Our final winner for this week is Chris Minns. Chris Minns is the Premier of New South Wales, the member for Labor Party, Labor Right, and member for Kogarah. Minns' Labor government recently won a by-election in Kiama. That was the seat of a former Liberal turned independent, Gareth Ward, who was encouraged to resign over sexual assault allegations recently. Kiama has been a solid Liberal seat since Ward took office in 2011, with his last Liberal election leading him with a win of 62% of the two-party preferred vote, which is quite high. However, in the last election, where Ward was an independent, the Labour candidate was able to get 69% of the two-party preferred vote. And in this by-election, she got 60% of the two-party preferred vote and 38% of the first preference vote. I want to clarify, that 69% is not against Gareth Ward. It was actually against the Liberal member. She did not get significantly more against Gareth Ward. In fact, I want to correct my mistake here. So against Gareth Ward, she got 49%. So it was pretty close. He only got 50%. He won by about 1,000 votes. And while this is a slightly worse two-party preferred vote this time around for the Labour Party, it does show that the Liberals are still unable to win this seat in New South Wales. Some people are arguing how this shows that the Liberal Party of New South Wales is starting to lose its footing in the state, especially as some outlets are arguing that they are unable to be organised and that the Federal Labor Party has had to overtake and do a guardianship over the state party in order to get it back in line. And the Labour Party has been steadily increasing in popularity since the 2023 election, with 59% of the vote going to Labour in the two-party preferred system as of currently, and 38% saying they will choose Labour as their first preference. With the election in 2027, it does not seem likely, at least with the current leader of the Liberal Party, that they will recover in time. Not only this, but Minns has also been criticising older generations of Australians for blocking housing development within Sydney due to what he would call NIMBY culture or not in my backyard culture. This was leading to many young Sydney-siders having to leave due to being unable to compete in the housing market due to limited product at higher prices. Minns plans to make it harder for local councils to deny applications for housing development, and he's also stated, "We don't have any ambitions to be antagonistic to local councils, and some councils have been brilliant to work with." This shows he is willing to work alongside councils in a productive manner to make changes be as painless a process as possible. This is likely to win him support of younger voters who have recently been upset with his government's stance on the pro-Palestine protests, where he tried to block them and make it unable to occur on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So for this week, Chris Minns is a winner. Before we go on to our losers of the week, I would like to thank you for watching so far. I hope you've been enjoying. Please like and subscribe if you want to tune in for the next week of Australian politics. If you have a suggestion for who you would like to be a loser or winner of next week's Aussie Leader Leaderboard, please put a suggestion in the comments and I will look into them. If you could also give a reason for why they are a winner or loser, that would help me out a lot. Losers of the week. Well, let's start off with Mark Speakman. Mark Speakman is the leader of opposition in New South Wales, the leader of the Liberals in New South Wales. He is a moderate Liberal, and he is the member for Cronulla. As stated in the Minns segment, Speakman's party was unable to recapture the seat of Kiama despite it formerly being a foothold of Liberal values. This has brought up questions of Speakman's leadership capabilities and whether or not he is fit to be the leader for the New South Wales Liberal Party, which has been struggling to stay afloat since the 2023 election. The Guardian predicted if Kiama is a basis for how seats will swing in the 2027 election, New South Wales Liberals would be likely to lose 12 to 14 seats. If this all went to Labor, this would give the government a majority equal to that of the federal Labor government. This would also be a warning to the federal Liberal government that their mirroring of New South Wales public infighting would lead to this outcome. Fortunately for Speakman, it doesn't seem like anyone is keen to replace him at the moment in terms of his leadership, despite his leadership starting to be questioned by those within his party. I guess the biggest defense for Speakman's loss in Kiama is that before Gareth Ward, Kiama was a Labour stronghold. So maybe it was his cult of personality that was able to hold the seat for so long. However, if it is people and not politics that make your party strong and viable within a seat, that shows why the Liberal Party is struggling with its identity and how it fits into the New South Wales political theatre. And therefore, that will make Mark Speakman a loser for this week. All right, let's move back into the big leagues. Susan Lee. Susan Lee is the leader of the federal opposition, leader of the Liberal Party, moderate Liberal, former centre-right Liberal, and a member for Farrer. If the last 3 weeks are anything to go by, it is pretty clear that the Liberal Party in the federal government does not have a leader that everyone respects. First of all, we had Jacinta Price dropping a bomb, unable to put her support behind Susan, and now we have Andrew Hastie and John O'Dunham taking multiple attack at Susan on net zero needing to be abolished or they'll walk from the front bench, as well as the party needing to be stricter on immigration. They didn't state whether or not that would make them not be a part of the party, but they also made it clear that they wanted the government to be stricter. This shows that her government leadership is very, very shaky and that her support is starting to run out, especially with those on the right of the party. As mentioned in the Hasty section, he's been rumoured to be building his own prospects for the leadership of the party. Lay continues to be unable to steer the ship back into the right direction as more and more holes get pushed into the ship, and it just looks like her support is running out. As stated in the Hasty section as well, it's rather a question of when, not if, she will be replaced. And it's even more ambitious to say, will it be before the next election, with some believing it will be this year that she does get replaced. We'll have to observe what impact this has on Australian perspective of the party, especially if we think about the Rudd and Gillard days where infighting was consistent. I think it's pretty obvious that Australians don't appreciate it when the parties can't get it together, and they will make it almost impossible for you to win. It's weird to think about the fact that Dutton was a uniting figure that was keeping the party afloat, and now that he's gone, the party is kind of collapsing within on itself. It's almost hard to acknowledge anything serious happening in the country. Like we talked about the net zero stuff. The Prime Minister literally just went to the UN. He's got some things happening internationally, and he's been having some troubles there. But when you have Game of Thrones happening live, you want to watch it because it's both funny and deeply, deeply cringy. Like, you just feel bad for the people it's happening to. And this whole Lay saga is probably the most entertaining Australian politics has ever been. So yeah, that's why she's the loser for this week, because her leadership is continuing to fall apart under her. Well, our final loser for this week is Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia, leader of the Labor Party, Labor Left, and member for Greynalder. So why is Albanese on here despite Susan Lee also being a loser? Despite his net zero commitments, despite an actually pretty good speech at the UN, if not cookie cutter speech, Anthony Albanese has been having trouble internationally. Not terrible trouble, but just kind of stagnation trouble. So Anthony Albanese has been trying to get some Pacific agreements signed, exporting immigrants to a different country, and then creating a defensive alliance with Papua New Guinea. The government, therefore, has been perceived as trying to strong-arm Pacific neighbours rather than truly negotiating with them and not treating them currently as equals. Negotiations are most likely going to reopen at a later state, and some predict they will happen in October. Whether this is too late for the government and their support in the eye of the public will depend. I don't think a lot of people are focusing on this, more so because they're looking at the Liberal Party and just going, what the fuck are you doing? I had to go out of my way to find this story. That's how volatile things are currently for the Liberal Party. This is more so a loss for Albanese rather than Richard Marles or Penny Wong, as he has been the figurehead of these negotiations. Sometimes you get someone else from the party being the figurehead, but he has been present. He's flown directly to these countries. There was also a fairly inconsequential thing 2 weeks ago where Albanese wore a different colour outfit to every other member of parliament, which some argued made him look separate, made him look weak, and made him look like he would just do whatever he wanted. It seems more likely than not the government will come to an agreement with these Pacific nations, so we will most likely be back with this topic in a matter of weeks, increasing Albanese's support up. As the ABC News report says, if the Albanese government is right about this, and both pacts are reeled into the shore in the coming months, then the embarrassment of the last 2 weeks will quickly fade into the far distance. Nothing speaks louder than results. But this does bring up an important question, which I would like us all to ponder. Is Australia not a priority for the wider world? And what does this truly mean? I have two interpretations of this. Interpretation number one is places feel secure with Australia, aka America's tariffs on us being low, these negotiations supposedly going to occur at some point, unseen agreements that benefit everyone, and this shows that Australia is a reliable partner that people don't feel like they need to parade about and make it very obvious and very clear and rush things through like with America. And therefore, they just feel very safe with us and very secure and know, hey, we'll do that when it suits us. We'll do that at a time that benefits everyone, and we just won't do it right now. The second interpretation is that Australia isn't important in the global sphere and are being forgotten about and seen as unimportant in the development of other countries in comparison to things like China, Russia, the EU, or the US. The one saving grace currently for Albanese internationally is his speech at the UN. It was pointed and made it clear where exactly Australia was standing on key issues such as climate change, such as immigration, such as Palestine, and it was very adverse to Donald Trump's talking points. This has made some bring up the fact that it's going to be tense when the two meet up eventually in October, and adds to the seemingly growing list of high-stakes international negotiations that Albanese will have to keep track of. And while stagnation isn't perceived as positive in my opinion. However, the PM may just be in a holding pattern, and October may end up being a month of never-ending wins for Albanese if he plays his cards right. Unfortunately for Albo, domestic small wins on such things as Palestine recognition and net zero changes are unable to rectify his struggles within the international lane, and that is why he is a loser for this week. So, who is the ultimate winner and loser for this week? Well, the ultimate winner for this week is between Andrew Hastie, Chris Bowen, or Chris Minns. I have to say that the ultimate winner for this week is Chris Minns. Chris Minns has a very clear, dominant lead, despite his government being somewhat unpopular, but the Liberal Party is just that weak and that unable to form a proper coalition. Chris Minns has currently such a lead on the Liberals that he has uncontested likelihood to win the next election in 2027. And winning elections is good. As I've said, the polls for the Labour Party in New South Wales has only been increasing, so it's most likely going to increase even more so, especially as he starts to turn more towards left young Gen Z voters and trying to bring them on board. We can argue that the second closest winner would have been Andrew Hastie, but he has been saying that he doesn't have ambitions for the leadership at the moment, and he does support Susan Ley, but most people don't believe that this is true, as they are seeing him taking jabs and they are seeing him trying to form a group around him for support of leadership. In terms of losers for the week, we have Mark Speakman, Susan Ley, or Anthony Albanese. I think this one's pretty obvious. Susan Ley is the ultimate loser for this week. It's clear that she is unable to keep her party in line. It is very clear that her party is starting to self-destruct and that she is losing grip of the leadership of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party wants to turn more rightwards, and the coalition in general wants to turn more rightwards. The National Party this year pretty much pulled out of the coalition because the party was not going in the direction they wanted, and therefore they would not support Susan Ley. However, now that the party is seeming to have contention and it's seeming to fight itself, Susan Ley looks to be losing grip, losing control, and unlike Mark Speakman, who also has seemed to lost control of his party, or Anthony Albanese, who hasn't got control of the situation he's in, Susan Ley seems to be in an unwinnable situation, in which case she is unable to recover from, and it's very clear that her leadership will be contested at least this year or next year. So yeah, that's the Aussie Leader Leaderboard podcast for this week. Today is the 28th of the 9th, 2025. Thank you for tuning in. If you liked, please like and subscribe to my channel, and feel free to leave a comment suggesting who you believe is a winner or loser for the next week. And if you can give me a reason as to why, that would be greatly appreciated. I hope to see you all next time. Bye.